Right, welcome everybody. I'd like to welcome you all to this meeting of the Planning, Transport, Regeneration, Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I'd like to welcome members and officers who are in the chamber, and also I'd like to welcome members and officers who are joining us remotely, and also I'd like to welcome members of the public and press who are tuning in as well remotely. First item on the agenda, apologies for absence. Do I have any apologies for absence, please?
Thank you, Chair. No, we've received no apologies for this evening.
Now, the minutes of the last meeting, there's one amendment I'd like to make, having met for a pre-meet with this. On page 14, myself and Councillor Allen were in the meeting. The penultimate paragraph, and if I read along, and then I will tell you where the amendments are. The Vice Chair sought clarification on the costs of the project and what the overspend would be. Anna Eastgate explained that the cost was originally valued at 70 million. That should say 90 million. And the DFT had allocated 90 million. That should say 80 million. Is that right, Councillor Allen? You were there as well, yeah? That's correct, yeah. Thank you. That's one correction I'd like to make. Other than that, are there any comments on the accuracy of the minutes or any comments related to the minutes? No? Agreed. Thank you very much. Now, declarations of interest. Thank you. Just very quickly how this meeting is going to run on the hybrid format, and I've discussed this with DEM services and also with the people who are joining remotely. What will happen, we'll have the report, and then I as chair will ask questions first. They will be taken in a block to allow anyone on Teams to answer. And then I will defer to my vice chair to ask any questions he has. And then I'm going to go to Councillor Anderson, start going alphabetically within the chamber, then Councillor Van Day, and then I will go to Councillor Gerrish and Councillor Potter on Microsoft Teams. Okay. If everyone's okay with that, we'll move on to the first item, A13 Widening Report, and Mr. Millard has kindly agreed to present the item, and other officers will then answer questions that we have based on it. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. You've got quite a detailed report in front of you, but I'll just take a couple of minutes just to run through the salient points within it before leading to the questions. So as the report sets out the executive summary, it's brought forward at the Chair's request in order to inform members on three specific matters relating to this major infrastructure scheme. Firstly, a breakdown of the costs and how the latest outturn forecast has been calculated. Secondly, details of where the finance to meet any shortfall will come from. And thirdly, a requested timeline of when issues have arisen in the programme, resulting in the anticipated completion date of the autumn-winter of 2021. In terms of the background, as I'm sure members will be aware, the project involves widening the A13 between the Stanford and the Hope bypass from 2 to 3 lanes from the junction with the A128 Orsett Cock and to the west at the Manaway, the A1014. It involves, amongst other things, a replacement of 4 bridges, and once complete, we will have a 4 3-lane carriageway from the M25 to Stanford La Hope, which has some significant benefits in terms of helping to enable economic growth, reducing congestion, resulting in a reduction in resultant pollution, and improving journey times, which will again further stimulate economic growth. If you look back at the project, it goes back as far as the Harbour Empowerment Order, which was put in place in 2008, with the Council taking responsibility for preliminary design in 2011. The Growth Fund deal was received in 2014 and provided the much needed certainty for the Council to award contracts and preliminary design in early 2014. This was followed in 2016 by separate detailed design and main construction work contracts being awarded. Turning, Chair, to the 3 questions in particular, at the bottom of page 18, moving on to page 19, you'll see a current breakdown of the costs on the scheme. I won't take you through the detail, but there's a table there that summarises all the various elements of the cost of the scheme and giving an anticipated outturn of just north of £114.5 million. The second question related to detail of where the finances to meet any shortfall will come from. The report sets out that the original approved budget was agreed at just shy of £79 million in 2016, and were arrived at on the basis of a preliminary design. Thank you. The council has recently undertaken a value for money exercise on the project, which identified that even with that higher cost of 114 million, the project still represents a value for money. The significance of this means that we've been able to draw down DFT funding via CELEP of just under £9 million. That was a decision reached at the CELEP Accountability Board as recently as last Friday, and that covers off the point that's raised in section 3.7 of the report as well. The potential options to bridge the forecast funding gap are currently being explored, but they're summarised in bullet form in paragraph 3.9 of the report. In summary, a potential for an increase in grant funding towards the delivery of the project. That's one option. Secondly, funding contributions from the private sector. And a third potential option is that relating to funding contributions from Thurrock Council. The Council recognises that there is a need to seek that alternative funding through whichever route is available to ensure that this project moves to completion for all those very positive reasons that I gave in introduction. And the third question, Chair, is around a timeline of when issues have arisen in the programme, resulting in the current anticipated completion date towards the back end of 2021. Stemming over pages 20 and 21 are the key decisions and events leading through to that anticipated 2021 completion, which is a revision to the original programme date of autumn of 2021. Paragraph 313 gives some of the reasons why that date has been pushed forward, and what we've been doing more recently to look at how that programme could be, we can ensure we can now bring it in on that programme, taking into account the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. Too early to be able to say with any certainty what those impacts may be, but they are being considered alongside those various options that I've outlined. It's important to stress in this section the complicating factors for the delays and the costs associated with the A13, and you will see at paragraph 317 a few of those reasons summarised. I think important in terms of 317.1, the point being made there is no single issue which has caused a delay. It is a combination of a number of issues and factors which have led to these increasing costs. Paragraph 318 illustrates that since commencement of the construction there have been three significant issues which have impacted upon the delivery of the scheme. Two of those relating to design and drainage, and then also to do with the bridge structures as well. The third issue relates to the diversion of utility apparatus. So those are those three questions that we've answered for you there, Chair, in the report. To conclude, the issues and decisions set out above occurred at the beginning of the process in 2014 and have had serious impacts upon the delays and the programme throughout. Since October 2019, the project has more latterly been reaching its project milestones, and why there is now a much greater level of certainty over how this scheme will be able to be brought forward in accordance with that revised budgetary figure, but also in accordance with that revised timescale and programme. So, Chair, that's the report in summary. As you said in introduction, if you've got any questions, then the team will be pleased to field them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Firstly, I will address you, Mr. Millard, just so I could give someone some eye contact. But obviously, it will probably be down to someone on Teams to answer. Firstly, thank you for putting this together. The whole purpose of Scrutiny is to have this level of scrutiny and have everything laid out. And it was, and it's good to see the questions being answered. And of course, the questions being answered provide more questions that need to be answered, and that's the nature of it. First, I'll ask a couple of questions. They can all be taken on block. Now, firstly, the figure we've reached at now is 115 million. It's a significant, it's a significant overspend, and the completion date of the end of 2021 is a significant delay. With that in mind, first question would be, can you and officers give cast iron guarantee that it won't go over this amount now, and that it will definitely be completed by the date? And my second question, and after these are answered, I'm happy to hand over to rest of the committee. In terms of the three options available to bridge the 27 million shortfall, I really want to express and say now that taking it in taxes from Thurrock taxpayers is not an option which I think we should go to. I think it just sets the wrong message. It's also we don't need this burden being thrown onto the people of Thurrock. They didn't cause it, so it shouldn't be taxpayers of Thurrock that have to pick it up. So I suppose my question for that part is really, what's the preferred funding option? And if it is tax rises or taking it from taxpayers, I would like to express my sort of opposition to that. So if I allow 30 seconds now for the feed to catch up, and then we'll hear some answers.
Okay, can anybody hear me? It's Anna Eastgate speaking here. Yes? Okay, good. So I'll take the question, the first question in relation to the spend
Andy first.
and programme, Chair. So the question related to whether we could give a cast iron guarantee that programme would be met and the overspend would be the extent of the overspend on this project. I'm afraid no, I cannot give any guarantee or certainty that that is the end of it. And for me to do so, quite frankly, would be fairly disingenuous. Can anybody hear me in the chamber? Because Andy's talking.
Would help. Thank you. I'll start again. I will. I apologise, Chair. So yeah. So just for the people who may not have caught that first time, you want to know there's a cast iron guarantee that the project timetable and budget won't slip further still. What I said, Chair, was that I can give a cast iron guarantee that there is a total grip on this project now, and my belief is that we will be able to bring this in on budget and with the revised programme as well. But I can't give you that cast iron guarantee because things might alter along the way that are unforeseeable. And as the report sets out, and as I set out in introduction, whilst I'm not expecting any major issues relating to the pandemic, clearly we need to factor in any delays, for example, that might occur or have occurred, but might even occur as things go forward. If we were to get a second spike or something like that, that we would need to factor in. But I am satisfied that there is a total grip on the project, and I am confident that we can bring it in. But I cannot give you that cast iron guarantee for those reasons and for that example. I don't think there's anything more to say on this one, unless Anna would like to. So the second of your questions was about the options to bridge the shortfall. Again, as I said in introduction, there are three areas we're investigating, outlined in paragraph 3.9. You give a very clear view on one of those options and your views. And I think the question is what's the preferred option? And if I could ask Sean to come in at this point to give some advice on that one.
Thank you. Just check everyone can hear me. Any indication? Excellent, Councillor Potter. So the absolute preference is going to be one or a mixture of the first two bullet points. Quite simply, as much as we can get through the various different funding streams which become available through highways related grants, government grants, the more we will do it. If we can manage to get money from the private sector through contributions or through Section 106 contributions, then we will do so again. I think what we can't get away from is the third bullet point, which is the funding, if you like, for want of a better phrase, of last resort. This is a contract with the council, so we will have to make whatever payments are actually due. And we would then obviously look towards capital receipts if we had to in the first instance, and as a very last resort into prudential borrowing. But certainly, in direct answer to your question, what is the preference? It's a mixture of the first two. It's quite likely to be a mixture of all three, though, to some degree.
Thank you for that answer. That does worry me, because it hasn't ruled out asking the residents to put their hands in their pockets, and it hasn't ruled out borrowing, and taking on more borrowing would be something that worries me, and I think it would worry our residents and other members of the council. Would you like to come back on that?
Chair. I mean, I'm the last one that's going to want to actually have to go out and fund this through council resources. My preference is by far to have to get it from elsewhere, and that is what all officers will try and do in terms of any form of government grant, as I've said, or through any private sector contributions which we can secure. But what we can't move away from is the fact that we have a contractual obligation to meet the costs of this contract. And that contract is ongoing at the moment, and obviously going through to the autumn of 2021. So whilst I would love to be able to say it will not impact on the council's finances at all, and we will be doing our best to make sure it doesn't, I can't stand here or sit here and rule it out either. But it's certainly going to be the last resort.
Thank you very much for the answer. Councillor Allen, as Vice Chair, your round of questions.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just kind of echo what you have said, Chair. With a £115 million total spend on the project, it's roughly an overspend. We've got an overspend of 27 million or 26 point something million, almost 27 million. And I echo wholeheartedly that this overspend shouldn't be sought through taxation on our residents. Most certainly not. And I understand there was a degree of unforeseen circumstances that have, arisen this amount. You don't entirely know what you're taking on until spades go in the ground, and what you may find, as our senior officer has already indicated, Anna Eastgate. So yes, as long as these monies are sought in other ways, Chair, other than reflecting it onto residents, then I can't see a problem with it. But it's just the residents that I want to protect.
Is that all? Is that your contribution? Yeah.
At this time, I mean, you've. I'd just like to echo what you've said, Chair. You got in first.
That's one of the privileges of being chair, I suppose. Is there anything to add to Councillor Allen's points?
I've got nothing further to add.
I hope I haven't stolen something you could say, Councillor Anderson. So I'll hand over to Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Andy, for introducing the report. I read through the report, and it seems, from what I've read, that the crux of the issue is the fact that we had two contracts going back to early 2016. We, as I understand it, we had one contract with the architects, and we had another one with Kier. Now, with this in mind, I'm trying to think how. I'd really like to know if there was an audit trail for these decisions, because it seems to me that, from what I've read, that this is the crux of the issue. Is there any kind of audit trail going back to 2016 to see who was making these decisions to split contracts, etc.?
Chair, the summary of the timelines and the split between the design and the build contracts is included in the report in paragraph 312. I don't know that there's much more detailed information than that that's available to hand, but if I can ask Anna if she can come in to maybe elaborate a little further than is set out in the report on those points.
Certainly, Chair. Can everybody hear me? Yeah. So if you look at the table on page 21, in 2016 there was two reports that went to Cabinet, one on the 9th of March and one on the 16th of December 2016. The first report on the 9th of March referred to tenders being issued for a detailed design and construction contractor to be awarded at the end of summer 2016. The further report that went to Cabinet on the 16th of December delegated authority to the Corporate Director of Environment and Place to award two contracts, one each for detailed design and construction. Now, there is an explanation potentially for that, and that explanation is that the contracts were awarded based on the Highways England Collaborative Delivery Framework, and part of that was as a consequence of the need to start on site, to spend the local growth fund money and the award of money from DFT by the relevant deadlines. So there was a need to progress quickly, and that need drove the decision making in terms of the contracts and the framework that was used. So there wasn't sufficient time to undertake a bespoke procurement exercise for a single design and build contract. And that is the only credible explanation for why that decision was made at the end of December.
Thank you, Anna. You said you used the word potential. This might just be semantics, but you used the word potential in there, and you also, I think, at the end there said, if I remember correctly, that this is the only credible possible explanation. So, are you saying we don't really know the explanation?
Unfortunately, Councillor Anderson, the people that were involved in those decision makings are no longer here. And so all we have is the Cabinet reports to go on and the agreed minutes. But understanding how the collaborative delivery framework contracts work with Highways England, I know that they don't have a design and build contract on that framework. They are separate contracts, and the only way to have a single design and build contract under the collaborative delivery framework is to do a separate procurement exercise.
Councillor Van Day, have you got any questions or anything to add at all?
Well, yeah, I think it's been established that it was in 2016 that the utilities was withdrawn from the contract. And I'd like to know if Councillor Cottrell had any part in the negotiations of that contract, or Andy.
Again, could I ask Anna to come in at this point, please, Chair?
So there is an explanation for why the utilities were de-scoped from the contract, and that was because the design was still preliminary at that stage and wasn't sufficiently developed, such that a tenderer could put a sufficient price to the contract for those elements of the work. So that's why the utilities diversion works were de-scoped, because Kier couldn't put a price to it, and for them to have priced the contract with the utilities works included would have been so heavily caveated that they wouldn't be able to do it. So the way the contract worked was they de-scoped those elements that had a level of risk that couldn't be priced, and they sat with the employer as an employer's risk, which is the council in this instance. That's standard practice, actually. That's not unusual.
Well, yes, I'm just considering it in hindsight now. Was it a wise move then to continue?
So the only other option, Councillor Van Day, would have been to have delayed the contract, and the contract had already been delayed from a start date on site as long as it could have been under the agreed contracts. So the only other thing could have been to pull out of the contracts and go back out on an award of contracts, new award of contracts, at a subsequent date in time once the detailed design had been worked up. But don't forget, by that time, the dates would have passed to have spent the growth fund and the DFT retained monies, and therefore the funding would not have been available to the council to pay for the works had there been any more significant delay.
So instead, we now found a 27 million pound shortfall. Not great.
Did you want to comment on that, or was you just making a point there, sir?
I was just making a point.
Noted. I'd like to now turn to members who are joining us remotely, and I'll go alphabetically. Councillor Gerrish, please. If you have any comments or questions, you are live.
Thank you, Chair. And can everyone in the chamber hear me? Yeah, thank you. I guess I want to start, first of all, by looking at the additional cost. And clearly we're talking about quite a significant overrun. And before you add in the £8.9 million additional grant, we're talking about some £36 million in terms of overspend of the agreed budget. I guess what we hope to know as members is that we've got a really clear sense on where that's come from. And I note across paragraphs 3.18 to 3.20, we note some of those issues which have impacted the overall cost. Do we have any kind of further breakdown on where exactly the kind of the contribution to those cost increases have come from? Aware that we've got kind of commentary here, but unless I've kind of missed it, I don't see any individual kind of breakdown on actually how much of the increase in cost each of those areas contributes. We've got a very useful table at 3.2 in terms of that total cost summary, but again, those are given for total current projected budget costs, not the kind of the breakdown before the increases. So it'd be useful to understand where those increases have largely come from.
Councillor Ghosh, do you want me to answer that question? So I can give you a detailed breakdown of about 33 million of the overspend. The bridges and the redesign of the structures, we have compensation events to the value of £12 million under the terms of the contract. The drainage, we have compensation events to the value of £9 million under the contract. Utilities diversion works have cost us just short of £10 million, and there's still some additional costs to pay there, while some further works are concluded relating to communications and water. And then, although inflation was accounted for in the contract under the original terms, the additional delay in commencing the contract has also added about £2 million, about 1.8 actually, if I'm being precise, £1.8 million worth of inflationary costs. So that adds up to just around £33 million of that overspend.
Thank you. That's really useful. So in terms of, let me just take the first £21 million of that spend in terms of compensation events. Clearly, we're kind of getting into kind of technical project management areas here, but I wonder if you could just break down for the committee when we say a compensation event, what is it that we are compensating, and to who are those payments being made?
Okay, so if I explain the way that NEC3 contracts work, this is an NEC3 contract, option C, which means a target cost contract. So when the tenderer tenders for the work, they set a target price. The council will only ever pay the defined cost being the actual cost under the contract. The difference between the defined cost and the target cost is often negotiated as a pain gain share between the parties, and it's supposed to be an incentive mechanism to ensure a contractor delivers works efficiently and as effectively as possible. And if they deliver under the terms of the contract, then there is a gain share, and obviously the converse is true if they don't. What that process enables is compensation events. So the system that we're using is an online system that all parties have signed up to. So when there is an issue that is arising on the contract, the main works contractor issue an early warning to the council. We assess that early warning and say whether we consider under the terms of the contract it's a compensation event. If we agree that it's a compensation event, we invite the main works contractor to submit a quotation. When the main works contractor submits that quotation, we have a team of people who undertake a robust analysis and challenge and review of that work. We then agree a price often, or we will go back to the main works contractor and say, we disagree with that fee quotation, you need to go back and do it again, or whatever it is. There's a little bit of negotiation there. And when we reach a final decision, it gets uploaded on the system. And when we agree that compensation event, so for argument's sake, a £50 million contract, we agree a compensation event of 55 million. That moves the target price to 55 million. We still only pay the defined cost, but the difference between the defined cost and the target cost is that pain gain share. So in layman's terms, and forgive me if I'm insulting anybody who knows about contracts, it's the more that the contractor elevates the target price, the more chance there is that they will be in gain share rather than pain share, which is why it's vital we have an appropriate, qualified and skilled team to challenge those compensation events when they come in. And that is a process that is very robust and is in place and has a level of rigour to it. So does that answer your question, Councillor Garrett?
Thank you. I think that's a very useful explanation for the committee. In terms of those compensation events, do we have a full breakdown of, first of all, the range and number of those compensation events that took place, and sort of how concentrated they were into a number of kind of very large compensation events versus a substantial number of smaller events?
Yes, Councillor Gerrish, we do have a breakdown of all of those compensation events. We're using a system called CMAR, which enables them to be logged and documented. We have a monthly review in our progress meeting of all of those compensation events, and we have a process in place whereby the value of those compensation events, where it exceeds relevant officers' values, comes back into the council through to Mr Millard and through to Sean Clark to secure the relevant approvals. We monitor them. We have a dashboard now that we have introduced monitoring compensation events that come in to make sure that we respond to them in the appropriate timescales. We do the relevant challenge and review to make sure that we're getting value for money, and we follow the process robustly. So yes, there is a detailed breakdown. They range from £500 through to, I think the biggest one I've seen is about 9 million, which was the drainage one.
Thank you very much. Final question from me then, and to come, I guess, back to Sean. And Sean, I think you did sort of talk through this point on your answer to the chair, but clearly in terms of looking at those potential funding streams for how we close the gap, obviously concerning that one of those would have to be potentially funding contributions from Thurrock Council. If we do go ahead with that, do you foresee any particular implications for any current or planned capital project or any other kind of area of activity of the council?
If we do need to use capital resources of any nature for this overspend, then yes, by definition, there would be reductions for future capital programmes. we're not identifying anything at this time. The earliest any of these would impact our budgets would be 21-22 and into 22-23. So we have plans. We have to plan out the impacts of future capital programme approvals and make that clear in the budget reports that come forward in February to the council as to whether there was that impact or not. But at this time, we're not seeing that impact.
Thank you. And then finally, in terms of the timeline to get certainty on how we close the funding gap, when do we foresee having that certainty on what the funding source is that we'll use to close that gap?
Again, Chair, thank you. We will be going right up until the final payment is made. So it's going to be a case of just maximising whatever we can from external resources, be that the grant funding or from the private sector, right up until the point the final bill is paid, Councillor. And at that stage, we'll know whether there is a gap that we have to fit. If we obviously come to those conclusions earlier because we've managed to achieve the funding capable, then obviously we'll report that at that time as well. But ultimately, it could go to the last minute.
Okay, thank you, Chair. That was everything.
Thank you, Councillor Gerrish, and thanks for the answers. I will now go to Councillor Potter.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I did have a couple of questions regarding the unfortunate history of this project, but other members have asked them for me, so I won't reiterate the previous questions. But moving forward, I am reasonably confident that our officers will do their utmost to stop Thurrock residents, taxpayers, etc., footing the bill for this extra money and try and source the money from elsewhere. I think they really get it, that we'll have the hump if they don't. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, and I can echo that. I'll certainly have the hump if Thurrock taxpayers have to fork out for this, or if it incurs borrowing as a result. So, thank you. Now, in terms of the recommendation, firstly, on the work programme, this item will be coming back in February 2021 at the end of this current municipal year. And that will be good to have a review, because by then, all the things that have been said tonight, we'll be able to hold to account whether it happened or not. And we'll all be in here for that. So with that in mind, if it hadn't been on the work programme, I was going to ask for another recommendation to be a review at the end of the municipal year, but it's here now. So the recommendation is that Planning, Transport, Regeneration, Overview and Scrutiny Committee notes and comments on the report contents. I think we can agree that we did that. So do we agree? Yeah. Excellent. Thank you. We now move on to the next item, the Stanford Hope Interchange report. And I'd like to invite Mr. Millard again to introduce, and then we'll go through the same format of chair, vice chair, members in here, and then members on teams. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Millard.
Thank you, Chair. Again, this report is provided at the Chair's request in order to inform members of specific matters in relation to the Stanford Hope Interchange scheme, and in particular 2 points. First, a review of the original scheme design, the costs incurred, overspend figures and any delays, and secondly, a consideration of the revised proposals for the station and the car park. By way of introduction and background, I'm sure members will be aware that this scheme involves the construction of new station buildings with a footbridge and lifts, passenger information systems, bus turnaround facility, passenger drop-off points and cycle parking. Since the last update to this Overview and Scrutiny Committee in January, a pause and reflect exercise has been undertaken to identify a deliverable and cost-effective replacement station which can deliver against the criteria set out in the original business plan. Moving on to the two questions in particular. Firstly, the original design costs, overspend and delays. So beginning at section 3 of the report, we break those down into those 3 specific elements. In terms of design, the original preliminary design of the scheme was a cantilevered deck and podium, and it proved to be a very expensive and complex design to deliver. As part of the pause and reflect exercise, we've looked at that design, looked at what was a very complicated arrangement at the front of the premises as well for the bus turnaround facility, looked and listened at the concerns raised by residents living in close proximity to the station over the impacts upon them, concerns also raised in relation to the Environment Agency, issues relating to the London Bridge road structure as well. And all that led to the conclusion that the design was quite cramped, and we're trying to shoehorn a lot of infrastructure into a relatively small space. So a review of the scheme design was undertaken as a result of that to identify an alternative design, but to be delivered within the existing budget envelope. And some of those issues are covered in the second part of the 2 questions this evening around the revised design proposals. In terms of the costs and overspend, the second part of this first part of the question, the budget for the scheme is 19 million, just north of 19 million pounds. This includes, for clarity, a £4 million addition approved by Cabinet in February 2020. The scheme is currently projected to be delivered on budget and is being brought forward in consultation with feedback from residents and other stakeholders who are all supportive of the general direction of travel. In terms of delays, simply, there are no delays with the programme currently proposed for completion in August of 2021. The second question posed, Chair, was in relation to the revised proposals for the station and car park. The pause and reflect exercise, as I mentioned earlier, identified that if the transport hub elements could be provided a different way, the scheme could also then proceed at less risk. The review included securing the purchase of the factory site opposite, meaning that, as summarised in paragraph 3.9, a number of benefits would accrue. In summary, the ability to bring the scheme forward in 2 phases, meaning that we could progress the much needed phase 1 building first, and as quickly as possible the transport hub phase 2 coming along soon after. Second, reducing congestion at the front of the station building, improving the public realm, making it safer for residents, etc. Thirdly, the addition of that, the acquisition, should I say, of that additional land would help to result in a much improved scheme overall, aesthetically, environmentally, and from a safety perspective. Fourth benefit was seen as being the provision of much needed additional local car parking. And last, the retention of some of the original key benefits of the scheme, including accessible lifts, new station building, widened platforms, footway over the rail bridge, and new bus facility could all be provided as well. So in terms of the programme, both phases of the scheme, so that phase 1, the immediate, and phase 2, are expected to be complete before the August 2021 published programme deadline. The recent pause and reflect exercise has also meant that the revised scheme has been developed in consultation with local stakeholders, local residents, ward councillors, resulting in a much improved scheme for the wider community, and also helping to provide some additional car parking for displaced commuters within the town centre area. So, Chair, that's in summary the comments on the various questions raised. Again, Officer team happy to field any questions that might arise. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Millard. Firstly, I don't know whether you intended to say this, but 3.4 says the additional 4 million was approved by Cabinet in February 2019, but you said 2020. Is it a mistake on the part of the report, or?
Apologies, Chair, that was my error if I said 2020. It's as published.
Now, with this project, obviously now we're talking about sort of the new project as if it sort of has no relation to the original one. When you look at the original project and you factor in the pause and reflect and moving on, how much is the new project an overspend of what would have been the original one had it gone through successfully? I'll just ask that first, and then I'll come on to a different point after that.
Chair, I'll let Anna come in more detail, but since the budget envelope was increased in February 2019, as I say, the budget the project's worked to is 19 million. The new and, dare I say, much improved scheme that's resulted through the pause and reflect will be brought in as far as we can ascertain its moment in time, design work to be completed, etc., within that same budget envelope. But Anna might want to expand a little more on that.
Yeah, Chair, if I may. The original design that we refer to, which was the cantilevered deck with podium, was never going to be deliverable within that budget envelope of 19.09 million. When we invited tenders for the scheme, based on the level of preliminary design available, the tender prices were coming in excess of 25 million. So we were still going to have to find additional money to deliver the scheme based on the original design, which was why a decision had to be made to do something slightly differently. This scheme, we are undertaking a completely different approach. We are intending to tender on a fixed price basis for the contract based on the budget envelope available. We have recently brought on board the detailed design contractors to start drawing up the detailed design and taking that general arrangements drawing on to the next stages, ready to inform that tender process. And they have very much been given the remit that the budget is what the budget is, and we need to design the scheme to ensure that it is deliverable within that budget envelope.
Thank you. So, thank you very much for that. But in essence, when you look at it as the Stanford La Hope Rail scheme, it is over budget. So, what my question is going forward, how is this going to provide good value for money, based on the fact it's going to cost more than it was going to originally? And how soon do you expect to see the benefits come in from it?
When you say it's going to cost more than it did originally, can you clarify what you mean by that? Because are you talking about the original budget for the scheme being 15 million, and then there was a cabinet decision to add in an additional 4 million? Because irrespective of that 19.09 million, the scheme was still going to cost on the original design 26 million. So this scheme, we've acquired additional land and purchased that as part of the budget, and we will still be delivering the scheme within the 19.09 million pound budget envelope. So I'm not quite clear about what the question is.
Okay, so the question is, when we talk about the 15 million, where does that relate to with the 4 million that moved it up to 19 million?
So that was that was a decision made based on the previous design. So that was based on the original ECI NEC3 contract that was awarded to do preliminary design with early contractor engagement and then a tender price. So the issue with that design, because it was works in close proximity to the railway, it was necessitating significant network rail infrastructure diversionary works, which again were going to cost significantly. But the cantilevered deck platform on which the station building would be sat needed to be built out over the Mucking Creek on steel beams. And it was the steel beam structures that were driving the cost and the design. So by removing the bus turnaround facility from the front and providing that across the road on another piece of land, it enabled the scheme to come forward within the existing land ownerships without any need to build the steel beams cantilevered deck. And that has enabled the cost to come down quite significantly. That shaves about £8-9 million off the cost of the scheme. So it's not anticipated, based on the next phases of procurement on a fixed price contract, that we are going to exceed the budget envelope of 19.09 million that has been allocated.
Thank you. So just before I hand over, I was going to ask the same question that I asked about the A13 programme. I think you've kind of answered it, but just so I've stated it, is there a cast iron guarantee now that whatever happened in the past, this is now it's not going to go over budget and it's going to be on time?
So I have a greater level of confidence on the basis of the intended procurement process we are looking to take this scheme to market, that by using a fixed price tender, we will have a level of certainty over the cost, certainly. I don't envisage there to be any delays in programme, simply because we'll be bringing the scheme forward in 2 phases, with the idea of prioritising the station building. We're aware that the original station building was demolished, and therefore the residents and commuters of Stanford are using temporary facilities at the moment. So there is a need to bring forward that work as soon as possible. So it is anticipated that the scheme, in terms of the station building, will be up and running before the transport hub on the site across the road, for obvious reasons. We are making use of value engineering. We are also working with Network Rail, who have got significant planned outages on the network for works that need an outage booked, because then we're not funding that. That saves hundreds of thousands of pounds off the cost of the project. So we're not leaving any stone unturned. And I have a greater level of confidence, as I've said, that this project, subject to a smooth running procurement process and sufficient tender interest in it, that we can bring this project forward on programme and almost certainly on budget.
Thank you. Did you indicate, Mr. Millard, that you wanted to
just briefly,
before I go over to my vice chair then?
Sure, just briefly, Chair, just to reiterate the points made by Anna and to support her in that statement, that I am absolutely confident that we've got the necessary grip and rigour around this particular project. Can we give a cast iron guarantee? Who knows what's around the corner? So the simple answer to that, in all honesty, is no. But I can give the committee absolute assurance that I'm very confident that we're on top of this, and that all of the issues that Anna's identified in terms of needing to bring this in on programme and bring it in on budget are being very, very closely monitored and delivered.
Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Chair. In comparison to the A13 project, and its overspend, I think this is probably some good work, well done, to bring this in on budget. And it looks like a lot of work has been put in. So I'd like to thank Anna as well for putting in the amount of work she's put in, officers and all other contributing people to this, because it does seem that a lot of money has been saved here. Chair, with scrapping the cantilever idea, acquiring the extra land for the bus turnaround. I do believe when I first looked at the first proposal, the first design, I don't think the bus thing was going to really work anyway. Looking at it, it just didn't seem there was adequate enough room there to turn buses around. But like I say, extra work's been done, money's been saved. Let's only hope now that it does come in on budget and not a penny over, and that it's bought quickly and efficiently for the people of Stanford-le-Hope and all that use the station there. Thank you.
Is that a question as such, or was making a statement there? Yeah. No, it's not.
Great work, Chair. That people involved, have saved a lot of money, and let's get this project done.
Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. And again, thank you, Andy, for going through this report. Anna alluded to it when she just spoke, and that was that we demolished the building, and we've had temporary equipment at Stanford for a while now, and that has been disappointing. I've spoken to a lot of residents that have been disappointed with that, and I think that's why it's this sort of pause and reflect exercise has been so good. You know, I've looked through it, and we're no longer building into the creek. We've got more parking, which is particularly important given the loss of King Street car park. And so I'm going to sound a little repetitive, but I'd like to thank Hannah and other officers for the work they've done on this. It really does look like that this project is going in a positive direction. So thank you for that.
Councillor Van Dijk.
Thank you, Chair. Well, whilst I'm not a councillor for the ward, I welcome the protection of the creek and seek assurances that you'll continue to protect it.
Councillor Van Dijk.
That's everyone in the chamber, so now I will go to Councillor Oliver Gerish.
Thank you, Chair. I think a lot of the content here has already been covered by others. I suppose the general point to come back to, and following on from the piece on the A13, is that it's taken us years and years and years and a pause and reflect to get to the point now where we're kind of shaping this project and starting to think about next steps. Where did that kind of delay come from in terms of kind of the way that we are set up to deliver these kind of projects? Has it taken us sort of looking at the setup of the team and sort of filling in any kind of specialties or kind of any kind of skill sets that the kind of council didn't have? I'm just curious as to why it's taken this kind of fairly major kind of stop and rethink to get this project back facing in the right direction.
I think it's a combination of those things, Councillor Gerish. I think certainly there's been a change in resource on the project. Obviously, we moved the projects and restructured the team slightly so that the transport projects came under my remit. I think it took potentially an outside view, somebody who hadn't been embedded in the detail of the project, to do that step back and let's have a think about how we could deliver this differently. I suppose I've probably been round the block a few times. I'm a bit long in the tooth now, so there's not too much that phases me. So I'm grateful for everybody's positive comments, because I do believe genuinely that this is a real positive outcome for this project and something that is going to deliver something much improved for the residents. So I think it really is a combination of issues. But as I mentioned to the Chair and to the Vice Chair earlier on today, we aren't sitting back on our laurels. As a directorate in place, we are looking at our processes, our systems, ensuring we bring much more rigour into our processes, and making sure our governance is watertight. And we are applying the learning across the teams who are involved with big projects to make sure that we dot the I's and cross the T's, and we don't allow a repeat of any of the issues with the A13 to happen again. And, you know, that's reflected with the civic offices work. Recently, we've had conversations with that team who are using the same contractor. We've been making, sharing information and knowledge to make sure we're aware of what's been happening. And I've got every confidence that that's going to be a completely different project. Again, even though there are some similarities in terms of who's involved in that project. So, yeah, we are learning our lessons for the future. And I think there's a commitment from the Director of Place to make sure that we continue to do so.
Thank you, Chairman. I think that's the lesson that we absolutely have to nail here, that as we deliver these large infrastructure projects in future, we have to get not just the design right, but the execution, the delivery of that kind of project. And I think it's very important that we make sure that we have the team set up in a way that allows us to deliver projects on this scale, because, this is Thurrock, where we all know the volume of these types of regeneration projects that come our way and will come our way over the next 20 years. So I think it's absolutely crucial that we put the ability of the team to deliver on these sorts of scales of infrastructure projects first and foremost in our thinking. So I think we'll all watch with interest as the next set of schemes kind of move from initiation to delivery. And that was all from me, Chair.
Just before I go to Councillor Potter, I think you indicated, Mr Millard, that you'd like to speak.
Yeah, just really to build upon off the back of Councillor Gersh's question, the points made by Anna. It's the amount of schemes that we've got and the amount of funding that this borough has got has been considerable. If you look at local growth fund, there's more that's come to this particular borough than any other part of the South East Let. So it's a considerable responsibility. I think we've taken some really positive learning from these schemes, as Anna has indicated, and real confidence to be able to deliver projects of this nature going forward. And in that regard, I think it's really important that we stop and have a look at what that actually means, because our ability or otherwise to be able to deliver these projects is the sort of thing that gives confidence or otherwise to the private sector to want to put down their roots and invest in our place, and to make the lives of our residents better and to help stimulate further economic growth after we've hopefully very quickly got through a recovery phase. So we've seen it as absolutely vital that we not only rebase these projects in the way that we've described this evening, significantly bettered the Stanford La Hope scheme. It's not just about bringing it in on budget, but it's actually creating something which will be considerably better than originally envisaged, but also take that on to the next projects as we continue to be ambitious and continue to look for this type of infrastructure investment. But getting it right builds our confidence, which is why we see these schemes and the learning from them as being so important.
Councillor Potter.
Yeah, just a quick comment, really. I'd like to echo what Councillor Allen said. He seems to sort of think they're doing a really good job. And I know a lot of people think that I've got a reputation for calling the fuel tank half full rather than half empty. But I picked up on what Anna said when she used the phraseology fixed price tender. It's a bit when you start learning basic financial law, the difference between a quotation and an estimate. Fixed price tenders have to be fixed, and that is really good news for us, and I'd like to commend them for the work they're doing so far. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Potter. Glad you didn't have the hump with that one. Now, like with the A13, this scheme will be coming back in the work programme for our last meeting of the municipal year. And that gives us a bit of an assurance as a committee that we can have it again and, hold all relevant people to account for the promises that have been made tonight. Now, the only recommendation we have is that the Planning, Transport, Regeneration, Overview and Scrutiny Committee notes and comments on the information provided related to the Stanford La Hope Interchange project. Are we agreed? I saw a few nods on the teams. Now, the next item, Grey South Regeneration area, underpass and public realm option selection. This can be found on page 33 of the report. And as before, I'd like to ask Mr. Millard to lead us physically in the chamber before we then ask questions of other officers who are on teams. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Chair. This report focuses on progress with the Grays Underpass project. It describes 3 design options, outlines the current position and recommends a preferred option to be taken forward. By way of background, over the past year, the design for the options for the underpass project have been through a rigorous set of technical assessments, and in May 2020 the Council received the final version of Network Rail's option selection report, which discusses these design concepts in detail. In March 20, a public consultation exercise was undertaken. It had online presence through late February until mid-March and physical presence across Grays Town Centre. A summary of the consultation responses is included within section 3 of the report in front of you to assist in decision-making processes. The underpass project now requires a decision to narrow the options down from 3 to 1 so that it can be further developed through the remainder of the design stages. It's anticipated that the option selection process will be concluded within the early part of 2021. In terms of the issues, options and analysis section, option C, otherwise known as the Plaza, scored the highest against a spectrum of criteria, and the option selection report concludes option C as the preferred design option. Paragraph 3.4 of the report in front of you sets out the key advantages of option C. In summary, good equality of access for people using the ramps rather than steps, the creation of usable hard and soft landscaping areas at the entrance, creation of development plot fronting onto the plaza, providing further activation, increased security and economic prosperity. The results of the public consultation exercise undertaken earlier in the year mirror the results of the option selection report. That was a technical exercise, the option selection report. Of the responses received to the consultation, 77% either agreed or strongly agreed with proposals for an underpass. Furthermore, 81% of respondents selected option C as their preferred option. And you'll find in Appendix 3 of the report details of that full consultation exercise. At this stage, the cost plan for the design options could increase the project, but it should be noted that these are estimates based on a very early design stage, and we are very conscious of the fact that we will need to bring this project in on budget. Goes back to some of the previous discussions and debates this evening, of course, Chair. In addition, the design development work and a number of strategies are being employed to further reduce the cost and or increase the budget from external sources, so through either means. Paragraph 3.6 details in the bullets there some of those potential ways in which we can make sure that happens. Chair, that's it in summary. As with the previous reports, if you've got any queries, we have a team here, physically or virtually, to be able to assist. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I was looking forward to this item, not least because it is within my ward and directly affects my residents. So it's an important piece of work. Firstly, the freight traffic with places like Corriton and that use the line means that there's more freight going through Grays. Plus, we need to be able to make the most of the riverfront, and that's going to be crucial to the future redevelopment of the town and down by the river. So there are two main stakeholders who need this. Firstly, new people who want to use the river and to exploit the potential of it, but also existing residents who all live around here. And with that in mind, what mitigation is going to be put in place during the building of it to ensure for people who live locally, and also what further consultation could be done with local residents so that they are fully engaged and buy into the project and have a degree of ownership over it.
Chair, we have both David, who's the Assistant Director, and Rebecca, who's leading on the project on the line. I think if I can refer to them on both questions. In terms of further consultation, there will clearly be the need for further consultation as the scheme design is moved along and moves towards a planning permission. But Rebecca might want to elaborate on that a little more. In terms of the mitigation, can I just clarify that point, Chair? Is that mitigation whilst the construction work is taking place? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Can everybody hear me in the chamber? Yeah, good. I do like the thumbs up. Okay, so in terms of mitigating the impact of the construction, obviously the construction is going to take place in the town centre and will be for a significant period of time. It is a complex bit of kit that we have to get under the railway. There's two main things that we need to mitigate. One is just the general construction in terms of noise, dust, everything else that goes along with a more normal construction. That'll obviously be dealt with by the planning process, and we're already starting to talk to Network Rail Supply Chain to make sure they really appreciate that this is a town centre location and they've got to go above and beyond just to counter that. The second impact is obviously this is the only way of crossing the railway in that location. The only other way is to go all the way around Derby Road Bridge, which we'll appreciate isn't really an option for various mechanisms. So we are already starting to talk to Network Rail about how they mitigate any impact of closures. We can't get away from the fact that at some point during the process, level crossing will have to be closed. We are working very hard at Network Rail at the moment to make sure we minimise that as far as possible, and make sure that there are other ways of crossing the level crossing during that period. We haven't got the answers at the moment, and some of those answers will come when we're a little bit further on in design and we really know how long the level crossing is closed for. But we are making sure that Network Rail understand the importance of minimising that as far as. In terms of consultation, obviously there will be a planning application that goes along with this, and the necessary planning consultation will be done through that. I think as well we're giving quite a lot of attention to the wider Grays Regeneration programme. Obviously there's potential for town fund money to come into the town centre and future primary fund money. So what we are hoping to do is make sure that we go out with coordinated consultation methods. We don't want to keep going out to Grays residents constantly and getting advice on this project and that project in separate times. So we will be bringing forward a consultation strategy that pulls all the themes together and avoids consultation fatigue with local residents. But obviously the planning process and statutory will be done slightly separate from that.
Thank you very much for that. And in terms of consultation as well, I was thinking as well, not just the sort of the standard stuff, the notices that go in the paper. I'm thinking also, engagement with community forums, residents associations, to hear the lived experience of local people. For example, I know that antisocial behaviour will be a big concern, and to get designers down to the community forums to show how the threat of antisocial behaviour will be combated and things like that. Just to finish off, because I know other members want to come in, at the risk of sounding glass half empty, I think that was used as an analogy last time, in light of previous items on this agenda, what guarantees have we got that this is going to be plain sailing and we're not going to be in the position where we have to pause and reflect, or whatever terms are used? What guarantees are there that this is going to work first time? Because if it doesn't, my casework is going to go up, and I want it to work first time.
So I think at this stage we're a little bit too early to start giving guarantees. What we've tried to do is learn lessons from previous projects and make sure that everyone's sighted on where we are in the process and where the potential estimates are. As Andy said, they are very much estimates at this stage, and we're already looking at strategies to make sure we can reduce the costs and or increase the budget from external funding opportunities. We hear it loud and clear that we need to bring this back to budget, and all we can say is that we are working at a very early stage to make sure we do that.
Thank you very, very much for that. Now, Councillor John Allen.
Thank you, Chair. I've previously done a good degree of work on this project already when I stood as Vice Chair some 2 years ago on this very PTI Review and Scrutiny Committee. And I've always had several concerns regarding this project. You have mentioned antisocial behaviour, which is a big thing, not just in Grays, in all parts of our borough. I do believe, although we hear from Essex Police that numbers are falling, I don't believe that for one moment. And I've seen the antisocial behaviour both in Grays High Street when I've been walking through there myself. One of my colleagues see something rather ghastly. Councillor Spielman there one night, which quite frightened him. Now, my concerns with this project, and it being an underpass, is your antisocial behaviour, which it may well promote. I would like to think that we could have some kind of public protection order on that space once it's opened. I do believe we're going for design option C, which is the preferred option. I would like assurance of the best system of CCTV that can be installed, may be linked to our CCTV station at Tilbury High Rise, which is monitored by the concierge there. And I do believe they have a police radio there to you contact the police if they need to. There's also flood mitigation there in heavy downpours. I'd like assurance that there's going to be a sump pump system put in there, implemented into the design in case we do have heavy downpours, then it doesn't flood. So the pump system would activate on the sump filling and they'd automatically pump out the water that was going in. I'd also like to know, are we anywhere close to the water table, the sea level there, when we dig down? And also, how long would the works take to complete and the actual impact on the location, which you kind of touched on earlier? Thank you.
First, I'll ask Mr. Millard first and then go to officers on teams.
Thank you, Chair. And I'll defer to Rebecca just to give an indication, but it'll be an indication at this stage on that last point about how long the construction phase will take. But if I could just comment upon the concerns over safety and the engineering questions that Councillor Allen raised. I mean, both of them very pertinent, bearing in mind the location of the site, making sure that necessary flood pumps or whatever else, water pumps have been, depending upon the position of the water table, point one. So yes, that will be very much part of the engineering and design solution there. And absolutely, as soon as you talk about underpasses and those sorts of environments, absolutely key that issues of safety are looked at. So whether, again, that be through design chair or whether that be through the installation of CCTV or other facilities, things that we will very much take on board when we look at the detail of the design. Too early at this stage. The designs that you see this evening are there, as we've described, as conceptual, to be worked through in more detail. So that level of design and that level of detail isn't there in the schemes as yet, but absolutely the sort of things we'll need to take on board. With regard to the final question, Chair, again, it depends upon the absolute detail, but Rebecca might be able to give an indication as to likely construction times.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. I'd just add to that on the antisocial behaviour and designing out crime. Yeah, it is forefront in our mind. It was a key part of the assessment criteria. Whilst Andy's completely correct, we're very early on in the design. We have already given Network Rail's architect the details of our current council CCTV system and how that connects up locally to make sure that we don't miss any opportunities to exploit that to its fullest potential. On the construction programme, at the moment, Network Rail's estimates are looking at about 18 months from when they start on site and they finish. Their contract is the underpass itself and the steps and ramps by the side. The council will then have an additional package of works to make sure the steps and ramps connect into some very high quality public realm in terms of squares that sit either side of it. So it will be slightly longer than that. What I would say, though, is we see reducing that construction programme as a real target to help bring back the cost. The quicker we can do the construction, obviously, the less time you provide the site and the people are. So at the moment, the estimates at this level of design are 18 months, but we are looking to try and push Network Rail to reduce that.
You want to carry on, Councillor Allen?
Can I just make one more point, please, Chair? I'd like the overall project to be considered, to consider local schools to be a part of the interior design of the walkway underneath the underpass.
Yeah, that's absolutely something we can look at. So whilst Network Rail are in charge of doing the technical infrastructure in terms of putting the box under the underpass, the council's own design team are looking at all the fixtures and fittings and finishings of that. So as long as it's compliant with Network Rail safety, the design of that area is completely in our control. I think it'd be a really lovely idea to engage some of the local school children. So we're not at that level at the moment, but certainly one that we'll bear in mind in the future.
Brilliant. Councillor Anderson, anything to add or to ask?
Thank you, Chair. I just had a really brief question. I don't know if I'm missing something, but I looked in the consultation overview and it said that we had 47 contributors. And is that overall? I mean, that seems a little low to me. I don't know if that's the sort of the kind of response we'd expect from the consultation. And then the only other thing is a brief comment. I know it's already been mentioned. I've not been vice chair of this committee, but I have been on it for I think a couple of years now, and we had a similar report brought to committee. I think it was early last year, and I did ask about antisocial behaviour because I think that's in the forefront of every single member on this committee's mind, and rightly so. So it's good to hear that officers, and I quote, said this evening that tackling antisocial behaviour is in the forefront of your minds, and I'm sure we'll all hold you to account for that.
Councillor Van Day. That's
the question on the concept. Yes, or if I could come back on that one, Chair. Again, I'll let Rebecca go through any level of detail, but as I described in introduction, we used a variety of sources online and sort of physical presence within the Grey Shopping Centre to try and get as much local input into this scheme as possible. It also tallied with New River, the owners of the Grey Shopping Centre there, undertaking their own design charrette exercise as well. So we did have, for a scheme of this nature, quite a rich level of information that came through that process, albeit that you never get quite as much as you would like in terms of the quantum of input, but it was pretty reasonably responded to in that regard. But I don't know if Rebecca wants to add a little bit more about that exercise, but.
Yeah, we did only get 47 completed responses, as the report says, but we did have staff members at public consultation when we were in Grey Shopping Centre. And what we were finding was the local residents were more than happy to engage with us and tell us their views, but then they were saying that they were actually too busy and wanted to get on with their shopping and didn't necessarily complete the form. The feedback that we had on the day very much supported the responses we got through formally, but it's obviously hard to capture that other than saying anecdotally we can demonstrate support. We have got some more details, information on the number of people that looked at the online and the surveys online, so we know a lot more people engaged with the information. Again, they didn't necessarily convert to completing the survey. The only thing we can take from that is we think that if they were really, really against it and had huge concerns, then they probably would converted into completing the survey. But obviously that's just anecdotal evidence. It's something that we are going to look into in the future to try and make sure we do get that people engaging with us into a conversion to actually.
Did you want to come in just quickly, Vice Chair?
Yeah, can I just ask, Chair, was it only the one day of consultation you went out there to engage with the members of the public regarding this?
We had 2 days actually, one in the shopping centre and one in the council offices in the reception.
If I could just reiterate on that, I mean, 47 responses, that's not a lot in 2 days. I mean, that's quite poor. So in the future, as we build up to this project getting underway, will you be doing lots more of those, interactions with members of the public?
Yes, we absolutely expect to. It'll probably be linked into the other elements of the Grays Regeneration programme, as I mentioned earlier. But I think we're quite clear that we really need to work hard on documenting what people are saying to us. We did engage with much more people than the 47, but it's just getting them to fill in the form at the end of it. And maybe we need to look at something a bit more interactive, something that they feel is easier to do and will take less of their time. Or maybe actually we fill in the forms for them as we talk to them. 47 is not really representative of the amount of people we spoke to, but obviously we didn't want to claim more without any evidence that we could support it.
Yeah, before I move on, just with that consultation point as well, I'd be interested sort of how many of those 47 are people who live in the vicinity, whose lives are going to be affected both by the building of it, because it's going to take a long time to build, but also who are going to use it in their day-to-day lives just to access the shops and train stations. But we definitely need to look at consultation. Did you want to say one more thing, Vice Chair?
Yeah, when I said I've worked on this previously, like 2 years ago, we were led to believe, we were to understand on the committee there that these works would be undertaken quite quickly. I'm sure if my memory serves me correctly, and I know it seems far out, but they said that, you know, they could do most of the work of the tunnelling in a weekend. Am I wrong on thinking that? Because if my memory serves me correct, that's what we were told some 2 years ago, that the works of the underpass, the digging, would be done rather quickly. I just wondered if you could, because I'm led to believe now that these works are going to take a long time.
Chair, it's more than just the tunnelling exercise itself in terms of the facilitating work on either side of it. I can't ever remember that week's figure, but again, I'll ask Rebecca to give an indication. As she said earlier on, something around an 18-month programme, but there are elements within that programme in terms of when there will be that disruption.
Yeah, absolutely. The 18 months is for the complete totality. At the moment, Network Rail and their supply chain are still looking at how it's physically constructed, but the expectation is very much that the underpass box itself is prefabricated and then jacked under the railway. So that will be a relatively quick process for the actual getting under the railway. I wouldn't like to say if it was going to be weeks or days or months. At the moment, we haven't got that level of detail. But yeah, the 18 months is to do all the excavation either side, put in all the steps, put in all the ramps and get under the railway and put in all the fixtures and finishes and CCTV. So it is quite a complex operation to do the totality of the scheme.
I'd just like to say, Chair, I mean, 18 months is quite a long time in terms of, you know, impact on that local area, you know, and finding alternative ways around, you know, like I take it once they start this project, the actual rail crossing will be closed for the whole duration. Is that correct? And they could use the steps going over, but that doesn't cater for the disabled?
No, we're absolutely trying to avoid a situation where it's closed for the whole duration. So in the three options, there is one option that is aligned with the current level crossing and aligned perfectly with the highway. From a design term, that works really well to keep the high street on one whole alignment. However, that would absolutely necessitate that the level crossing is closed from day one and not opened again until the end. And we don't think that's a level of disruption to local residents. So the other two options move the tunnel 8 metres to the west. It does lose a little bit of the alignment with the high street, so we are going to have to make sure that the ground works harder so it all feels part of one space. Raise some interesting opportunities for activation, but it should also mean that the level crossing can remain open for some of the construction work. We are working really hard with Network Rail to make sure that that's for the vast majority of the construction works, but what we haven't got yet is indication from them of when the level crossing will absolutely need to be closed and when it can be kept open while they do the work.
I don't know if anyone else is finding this. Unfortunately, your feed is breaking up a little bit. So rather than have more of the you know, that sort of thing, if we have any specific questions that weren't, well, they were answered, but we couldn't hear it, I would just ask for maybe a note to be sent round to members, because I can't really hear it that well at the moment. Okay. Councillor Van Day.
Thank you, Chair. As a comment really to you, today you've commented 3 times on asking for assurances and guarantees for projects to come in on budget and on time. And whilst I agree, you know, you shouldn't build a house with a budget and not know how much the drains are going to cost. I just think what would you suggest to solve these issues? Have you got a crystal ball?
Yes, I have asked for guarantees, but to be honest with you, Councillor, that's the nature of overview and scrutiny. It's our job here to scrutinise overview of projects and to ask those questions, because the questions I'm asking of guarantees are the questions that everyone wants answers to, yourself included, I'd have thought as well. So are you happy with me asking for guarantees that taxpayers' money is being spent properly? Because I think that's probably what we're here for.
Well, of course I am. The last thing I want to do is spend taxpayers' money when it's not necessary. But we talk about the nasty, unforeseen things that come along. I'm just wondering how you would, have you got a solution to that for those?
Well, all I'm going to say is my job as chair of overview and scrutiny, and our jobs as members of overview and scrutiny, is to have the overview of the projects and to scrutinise. And part of scrutiny is asking for guarantees that things are going to work well, because that's what we want to happen. So I'm going to carry on doing that, and I think every member of this committee will do that. So that's where I stand on overview and scrutiny.
Yes, I'm not really, debating whether it's the right or wrong thing to do. I'm just saying, if you've got a suggestion that deals with these when these uncertainties come up. I mean, and money has to be found.
Again, thanks for the question, but all I can say is our job as members is to ask those questions. And if the day I turn up to a committee and don't ask the questions of scrutiny is the day really I should stop being part of it, because that's what I want to do. Have you got a question for the officers who are leading the projects? Have you got a question or a statement you'd like to ask the officers who are running these projects?
Not at the moment.
Thank you. I now go over to Microsoft Teams. Councillor Oliver Gerrish.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, a question from me. I think, first of all, it's important to say that I think this is a very important issue to resolve locally. Clearly, the issue around the level crossing grades is a fairly fraught one, and something that's very important to resolve for local residents so that they have a sustainable option into the future. And I think it's also important to listen to local residents on what they want to see. So I do welcome those elements of the scheme very much so, and clearly we need a solution here that will work. However, I do have to say that I do have some concerns on the report that's presented here this evening. And again, following the theme of the discussions that we've had this evening, that concern is around the proposed potential costs against the budget. Now, members will note from page 37, as I read it, that the currently approved budget for this project, 7.1, is £27.4 million. However, if we move on to page 38, currently the estimates are that the project as set out would cost anywhere from 34.9 to 37.9 million. Now, we've talked about mitigations, but we're already significantly above the base budget that's been set. In fact, from the reading of the report so far, we're approximately £10.5 million over budget on this project before we've even started. Now, that seems a very significant overspend before we've really gone to a detailed level of design. Now, Chair, if we go to page 70, we can see the evaluation matrix across each of the three options that were set out. And criteria E is on cost, and that's rated from 0 to 3, where 3 is that it fully meets the criteria, 2 is that it mostly meets the criteria, 1 it somewhat meets the criteria, and 0 does not meet the criteria. Option A is a 0, it doesn't meet the criteria on cost. Option B is a 0, it doesn't meet the criteria on cost. And option C is a 0, it doesn't meet the criteria on cost. Now, we've heard this evening that officers have plans in terms of what we might do on mitigation on costs or on the project budget. That is, we might look for ways of cheapening that cost, and we may look for other sources of income to help pay for what may be a very expensive cost. But when we're looking at, and by my calculations, we're talking about 38% over that base budget so far. When we're looking at that level of variance, it's hard to see what we can do to get that cost back to the level of the budget. So I guess I'd just like to ask officers to address those points and whether or not they see cost reductions or budget increases the most likely way of delivering this scheme. And I guess the additional concern is that if we're talking about a report back in 2021, if all of these schemes continue to be unaffordable, I don't want us to be in the situation where we're another year down the line, we see again that we've got an unaffordable project and we have to go back to the drawing board. So what are officers doing to present a much more affordable version of the project through the evaluation process, as well as the 3 that have been identified as currently failing the cost criteria?
Mr. Millard, you've indicated you could answer on that, and then obviously refer to another officer if you wish.
Thank you, Chair. In effect, just refer members back to the report and the bullets in paragraph 3.6 of the report. 5 of those which illustrate the work that we will be doing to reduce the cost of exposure, and the 6th bullet being to look at potential further funding opportunities. And we've mentioned at least a couple there that could be open to us. We're absolutely mindful of the need to bring this project in on budget. And we're absolutely mindful of the fact that we left with a significant legacy in the heart of the town centre, and that we've got to get it right. So there's a careful balance between the two. But through a mixture of those 5 bullets to reduce the costs, and the 6th bullet to look at those funding opportunities, we remain confident at this stage that is a doable proposition, but clearly we'll keep that monitored and managed throughout the life of the project.
Councillor Gerrish, did you want to come back on that and then invite other officers as well?
Thanks, Chair. I think really to seek a little bit more information then. So we set out at those bullet points at paragraph 3.6, the sort of areas of mitigation that are being investigated. I guess what that doesn't do is give us a sense of how well developed any of those potential areas are. So could officers maybe outline how much of that £10.5 million gap we think we can close with the mitigation measures that are to be explored?
Is that for Mr. Millard? Or?
Yes, Chair, thank you. And it's not to avoid the question, but the honest answer at this stage, it is work in progress. So I can't put a figure against each of those particular elements, certainly not one that is robust enough to properly answer that question. But suffice to say that, as I said, I think earlier on, through a mixture of all of those bullets, we believe we can bring this right down and to a position whereby the scheme can be delivered at high quality, on programme and on budget. But not possible to say specifically, Councillor Gerrish, at this moment in time, that each of those amount to a particular figure, because they are very much work in progress.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if Mr. Millard could point to any scheme that Thurrock's delivered where we've managed to shave £10 million off the cost of the project over the course of the project life cycle.
So this is me getting used to teams as well. I've just been prodded by Democratic Services that Mr. Moore has got his hand up. So we'd like to go live to Mr. Moore, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'm hoping people in the chamber can hear me now, and I'll take my hand down just to make thank you. Yeah, thank you. So it was just to pick up a point really, which is to say that this is a very early estimate. We don't as yet have a final cost. This is the point about coming back in February is that's when we'll have the costs. So Councillor Gerrish's question really, it's we don't yet have a cost that we're looking to shave £10 million off. It's currently a rough estimate. So there's plenty of opportunity and scope to try and shave some of those costs further. I mean, there are opportunities to increase budgets as well, and Councillor Karen, for example, is aware that we're already talking about including elements of the project in the town fund bids, and there are parts that we're looking to include in a future High Street fund bids. And so there's plenty of scope in those two bids for Grays. We're potentially looking at 25 to 75 million pounds worth of bids in those two schemes alone. So there is scope in there to try and include some of the elements. But I think that's it's a check, and it's both trying to reduce the costs on a number of schemes, as well as trying to increase the budget where that cost reduction doesn't work.
Yeah, thanks for that
Can't see
answer.
any hands up. Councillor Gerrish, I physically see a hand up now from Councillor Gerrish. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I won't label the point any further, because I think we've gone through the detail of this. I guess the warning is elsewhere where we've had initial estimates, and we'll go back to the 90 million or so that we had for the A13. Ultimately, detailed design tends to result in that cost going up significantly rather than down significantly. So I think it's just really important for us to have a very clear view on how we handle the developing view of that project cost or budget that's available. And I guess the ask in particular is that we have a plan of action for any set of circumstances where we don't manage to reduce the cost or increase the budget, and that we don't lose vital time from the project by that set of circumstances. Because what we can't have is another project where we drag on by 2-3 years. I think it's really important that we have a clear view of how we tackle that early.
I think that was more of a statement, really, just summing up. But did you want to come in on it?
It is, Chairman. Just very briefly, I mean, to give the committee confidence, of course, as we've illustrated, work in progress and with a need to report back in the early part of 2021. So this is something that we'll keep an eye on, but we'll also report back through this committee, cabinet and other sources, so there is that transparency around the process and how the scheme is being developed.
Thank you very much. Over to Councillor Potter.
Yeah, hello there. Thank you, Chair. Just a quick comment, really. I would always like to put the safety of our residents at the top of my list in this sort of construction. And I've also been looking at the 4.7 option evaluation matrix, which is on page 70. And if you look at item H, safety and security, it shares the joint highest weight of the project at 14%. And I'm just really pleased to see that. I mean, that they did this before the meeting. They didn't think, oh, we're going to do that to impress them. It's already there, 14%, joint highest for our resident safety. Very pleased. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Potter. That's definitely glass half full, that comment. So thank you very much for that. Now, the recommendation, again, this will come back to the committee as well. So we have assurances we'll be here again. The recommendation is that Planning, Transport and Regeneration Overview and Scrutiny Committee members are asked to comment on the proposal to recommend option C to Cabinet as the selected concept to be designed in more detail through the current Development Services Agreement contract with Network Rail. Are we agreed that we have done that? Agreed. And I see some nods and thumbs up, so we've done that. Now, the last item on the agenda is the work programme, which in a way we've been really going through as we've been doing this meeting as well, haven't we? Making sure that certain items come back. I'm not going to read out all the items. Could you all just take a moment just to have a look at the items, comment on any? Are there any you'd like to add? The only meeting I'd like to keep quite light as such, and I discussed this in the pre-meet with my chair and the officers, is the February 2021 meeting, because that's going to be a review basically of the projects that we've discussed tonight, and I think that would be a weighty item on its own. But in any of the other meetings, just have a look and let me know if there's anything you think is missing, and I can then work with DEM services and officers to put it in. Mr. Millard.
Chair, just in relation to the next meeting and discussions that we've had, the economic development strategy is there, but I think that bearing in mind the importance of the local plan sitting alongside that economic development strategy, I was going to recommend, with members' agreement of course, that the next meeting is focused upon a progress report on the local plan and an update on where we are with the new economic development strategy as well. Some of the other reports are quite detailed, particularly the transportation ones, and they could get wrapped up later in your programme for the year, I would suggest. So with your agreement, I propose that for the next September meeting.
I personally agree with that, because also I'm aware of being a member of the local plan task force. I know that there's a September meeting then. So with this extraordinary meeting plus the local plan meeting, that's a lot of information we can feed through to Cabinet regarding local plan, and I personally am in agreement with that, but obviously I want to make sure members of the committee are happy as well. Yeah, cool. Yeah, thank you for that. Anything else to any member in the chamber? Is there anyone who wants to add an item or comment on one?
Councillor, Chair, if I can just touch on, I mean, you know, we've gone through this COVID-19 pandemic now. We've got a lot of people talking about a second wave hitting us now. We haven't factored that in, you know. So if we do get a second wave of coronavirus, I mean, you know, it's going to throw all our plans out and also delay these projects. Should we maybe have a chat about that, Andy, and see if as and when it comes up, the second wave, hopefully it won't, but you know, if anything does come as a result of this, we could have a chat and factor it into a meeting. Chair. Just like to say, Chair, as we approach, you know, autumn and winter time, that's when we do pick up our colds, and you know, so people do generally get ill in the winter time, you know. So if it is going to be put down, you know, the common cold's going to be put down as COVID-19, and we continue to go on lockdown, it's really going to throw everything, you know, out. Yeah, in the wind, so to speak. Councillor Van Day just said. Before, the portfolio holder was indicated. Using my chair's discretion, I'm going to allow you to interject on this point, sir.
Oh, well, I've been trying to interject on other 3 points, but I won't mention them, about the other 3 points where I tried to interject to help you. Yeah, I'm sure you did. But at this point is, I think there's another item missing on this point here, is obviously there's the Build programme, which I think you need to think about, because we've just obviously gained some more money through the Prime Minister's Build programme last week for projects, and I think that should be on your work programme as well as over in Scrutiny. There's 4 large projects coming forward, and I think that would be very helpful for it. And it's a shame I wasn't able to talk on the other 3. I could have answered all your questions, but I'll answer them in Cabinet.
I look forward to it. I'll be tuning in. Now to members who are joining us remotely. Right, excellent. With that in mind then, I would now like to draw this meeting to a close. I thank all people present in the chamber, all those joining remotely, and public and press who have tuned in. Thank you very much. Stay safe. I'll see you next time. Thank you.